I'm Tim Mulaney. I have 4 novels out, all based here in San Francisco, and numerous short stories. And I am here to get the fuck out of the way and let these 2 gentlemen talk. I'm here to facilitate a conversation between these 2 authors. And we're going to get into a bunch of questions about writing, about the books that they have written, and how they got there, very much from the point of view of where you're sitting in terms of what it takes to write a novel and write a mystery novel. John Lescroart, who was introduced a short while ago, author of 24 novels, 16 New York Times bestsellers. John is one of the best authors that I know, and I mean that in every sense of the word, not just how it feels as a reader when a new book comes out and the visceral excitement you get about that and what it's like to turn the pages, but just as a human being. He has been incredibly generous to other authors at conferences like this, in terms of sharing his experiences, doing appearances with other authors that are just getting started. He's just gone out of his way to help other people coming into the business. And he spoke here a couple years ago about his personal experiences as a writer, both how he does it, we're going to get into some of that shortly, but also some of the hardships of trying to write and trying to get a book out. And contending with the personal challenges as well as the professional challenges when you're trying to do something you're proud of and publish that. And that was a great inspiration to me and a number of other people as well. So I want to thank John for being here because he's one of the best. And as a friend of writers, he's sitting next to a great friend of writers, which is Bill or William Petrocelli. I know she went for the full formal name on the book.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Call me Bill.
All right. Who's been selling books here in this bookstore for 21 years? Is that right?
Well, double that.
Double it. Wow. For a really long time.
Close to 40.
And after selling so many of our books and so many books to so many people, he decided to write one of his own. Took you long enough. And and it's a thriller set in, my God, 2082. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, how you ended up there, which I don't think anybody saw that coming. And the ground rules, as I said, my job is to facilitate a discussion between these 2 authors, because it's kind of obvious to everybody they can't stand each other. So I'm going to just get in the middle of that and try to keep the peace as we go along. I'm going to ask a series of questions, and then we'll leave enough time at the end for you to jump in and ask your own questions about them and about their books. The first question is a softball, but it goes to this point of writing and how even to get started. For each of your books, John, in your case, The Keeper, what was the idea or the germ that led to this particular book, or the plot that unfolded? What is it that started that?
Well, I was in the middle of writing the book previous to this called The Ophelia Cut, and always, I've been very fortunate. I've been under contract for about the last 25 years, so I'm expected to hand in a book every year. And so come about March of the year that I'm finishing a book, it's incumbent upon me to come up with an idea. And they don't really grow on trees after you've written 25 books. It gets a little trickier to find a really good idea. And so, of course, I picked the most cliched and obvious thing that came to my mind. I was reading Gone Girl. And this is how we learn from our peers, and we borrow from them shamelessly often. But I just love the idea of a woman who went missing. I was reading the book and I went, this is just one of the classic ideas. And I said, I don't care if it's been done a million times before, it'll be done a million more times. I'm just going to do one of these stories. And basically I just said, okay, I'm starting, here we go.
Fantastic. Bill, 2082, what the hell?
He's written 26 books. I've only written 1. So my idea should have been easier to come up with. Well, I'll tell you what. What I was really trying to do, I wanted to write a book centered around the idea of the role of women in society and the changing role of women, which I think is a major change over the last couple of 100 years. But I got tired of the day-to-day politics of it, the day-to-day issues. So I wanted to step forward and kind of look back to see what it would look like when the revolution had kind of run its course. That set me off into the future, and everything else kind of followed from there.
So let's talk about, you have this idea for a book, and in your case you have some recurring characters, but even so, even going back to the beginning, who's in the book? Who's going to make that happen? Who are the characters? And
Well, this is what I always start by trying to write. I mean, it's very Hemingway-esque. I think, you know, you try to write one true sentence, and that's just as true now as it was in 1920 and in 1820. You just try to see where the conflict is going to arise. And I didn't know, of course, the woman who was missing. I didn't know her husband. I didn't know what kind of family life she had. And I did know that I had a character named Dismas Hardy, and my publisher wanted a book with him in it. So I said, I think it's going to be a Dismas Hardy novel. Let's see. And I sat down and just started writing a scene. And that's the way all these books start. I am one of those people who really don't outline it at all. And so I just sit at my desk, wait till the blood comes out of my forehead, and then I start going, okay, time to write the first scene. What's interesting? What is going on? And having a character like Dismas Hardy, who's been recurring for 20 books, or more than 20 books, I've got to make him change. I have him grow up in real life time. So he's getting older, he's getting long in the tooth, he's getting really boring to write about, frankly. So I had to figure out a way to make him interesting and more fun, and I just sat down and started writing a scene, which led to a dart scene which opens the book. Has nothing to do with the plot at all, but it's really a hell of a lot of fun to read. And so that's the key.
So the outline thing is really interesting. One of the things you'll hear in the conference is it's about a 50-50 split and sometimes you see a distinction between mystery writers or thriller writers, which is a whole different conversation about who outlines and who doesn't. So Bill, did you outline this book? Did you just
Well, I outlined, but only as I was going along. The idea kind of hit me, and I started working, and John's absolutely right. It's one sentence after another. One sentence leads you in a direction you don't expect the next sentence to go to. But at some point, the plot got complicated enough. I had to sit down and kind of outline where I was, go back and fill in the pieces, write a little bit more, change the outline. So I'm not sure whether the book drove the outline or the outline drove the book. I tend to think that the outline was kind of superfluous, but it made me feel good while I was doing it. But
we all need ways to kind of explain to ourselves that we're actually really writing. And quite often we're not. We're sitting there at the desk going, I know I'm trying to do something here, and I'll go home and my wife will go, how many pages you write today, honey? And I go, three pages. None of them in the book. But it's part of what we do. Yeah.
I always tell myself that if you do something writing related, which might involve sitting at the desk or moving paper, that's good.
Sorting your socks.
That's exactly right.
No, this is absolutely true. I mean, the other day I'm working on another novel, and I sat down I thought, this is going to be an easy thing. This is going to be completely expositional. I had the characters all set up, and I sat there for 4 or 5 days and I wrote nothing. Now all of a sudden I realized what happened is I had the character's motivation all wrong. The character was telling me that I just didn't know her very well. So I had to sit down and rethink what her real motivation was. Once I did that, then I could kind of move forward on it. But it wasn't, some external structure putting me in. It was the character speaking back. And I think characters talk back to novelists all the time. And you better listen.
John, you once talked about genius mode and idiot mode, and this whole idea of like that, and you just mentioned a minute ago, the idea of just start writing a scene. You don't even have to know what happens on the next page. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that you cannot do as a writer is you cannot listen to your editor who's in your head. And so one of the things I recommend to everybody who sits down in front of a keyboard is to just get into what I call genius mode, where you just have to say to yourself, no one is better than me. It's just not possible. I'm writing better than everybody else in the whole field. Basically, I'm just the greatest genius that's ever tried to write. And therefore, you really got to, sell yourself on that idea, but then take the most outlandish thing that comes out and follow it down the path, and you would be amazed that suddenly you're actually writing pretty much like a genius. And you just let it rip until you get to the very end of the book, and then you put your idiot mode hat on, and you go back and go, who wrote this shit? But it's a totally different mindset. It's a totally different way to go about the day of work. And the first part of it to get something down is to really convince yourself that you're really worthwhile. What you're doing is important, and you're a genius at it. That's it.
Tell yourself that story, right? You have to be curious, turning the pages. So let's talk about the editing part, right? So how was, as a first-time author, how was that? Not this.
Self-editing or?
Exactly. Let's talk about the self-editing.
Self-editing is crucial. I've heard many authors say, and at the time I didn't understand it, but I realize it now, that it's really the best part of writing. You write a bunch of stuff, and as you go along, I tend to go back a lot and change. It changes as I go along. But every now and then I'll hit something and I'll think to myself, I've got to change something that happened 50 pages before.
Do you go back and change it then?
Not necessarily. Sometimes, depends on how big it is. Sometimes I just leave it there. I just make a note thinking, when I go back the next time, this has really got to change. And it usually has to do something with the character or the motivation or something like that. And then when I go back again, I tend to get the same thing like you wrote this shit, but I got something I can edit. I don't have to start from scratch. It's not a blank page. I can kind of craft it into something. At least that's how I do it. And I hope.
Are you editing as you go, like the next day on the chapter you just wrote, or you just?
Yeah, what I have to do, I'm never able to pick up where I left off the day before. I've got to go back and sort of like, doing the long jump. You got to go back to the end of the first part of the track and run all the way down it before you can make the leap. I've got to go back at least 5 or 10 pages and read what I wrote again, just to get into the story, just to get the characters into my head, just to get me into my characters. It's the mindset of the characters, to me, is the most important.
I don't do that at all.
Yeah.
I don't do that at all. I just read about the last paragraph before I quit the day before, and then I just keep writing. Because I'm very much a believer in production. You're going to write a lot of bad stuff, but you're going to write a lot of good stuff. The main thing you got to do is write a lot of stuff. And, you got to keep moving forward. Otherwise, the inertia will drag you down and it will stop you into the ground.
And that's why he's got 26 books and I got
That's
one.
True. I finished my latest book on Monday. Okay, what is this, Thursday? All right. I'm 9 pages into my next book.
No! Killing me.
Okay? And I have no idea what it's about, but it's brilliant. It's so good. Jeez.
It'll be brilliant until it's finished, right?
That's right. That will be really bad.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, I never go back and read over anything because it's just a way to get caught sorting your socks. Honestly, that's, oh wow, look at that paragraph 14 pages ago. That's not very good. I think I'll spend 3 hours making it perfect. No, don't do that.
That's great.
I'm a little adamant about this. Everybody says everybody does it their own way and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's just wrong. There is a right way to do it. It's my way. Okay? You want to walk out of here with something that's going to help you in the day-to-day world of writing? Write stuff every day.
This is why we needed a moderator. But I'm with John on this one. Just get it out of the page. Then it's easier to deal with a big ball of clay. And Bill, that's why it took you 21 years to write the damn book.
And there was a mistake on page 43.
Okay, guys, I don't go back and rewrite. That's enough to get me in the mood. I got to get in the mood. I mean, to my mind, I'm just walking in off the street, sitting down in front of the typewriter, the computer. Can't do it. I got to get into the head of the
I
character.
got a good trick for you.
What?
Write a half a sentence the day before. Leave off half a sentence in.
That was the best advice I got when I came here as a student.
Well, man, that's
was to
pretty
leave
sneaky.
yourself
I
an
like
opening.
that.
This whole idea of leave yourself an opening, even if it makes no sense the next day. Don't come into a blank page. Just write something. You could just like you
The
said.
blank page is hell.
That's
Yeah.
sneaky.
Blank page is
I
hell.
like that. I'm gonna
Yeah,
go
it is
and do
sneaky.
that. You should. I am.
That's a good one. See that? All right, we can all go home. So in both cases, these books have a lot of suspense. They're designed to keep you turning the pages. There's a lot at stake, and you naturally think about, like you said, okay, the missing woman. What's the huge scope and ambition of the Circle of 13 in terms of what you're writing about, but what's at stake and the way it opens. But when you get into these books, they're really about relationships. They're very much about relationships, familial ties, things like that. If you look at relation to Diz and his wife, Ada's wife, the tensions there. Talk a little bit about that and balancing that in a book where you want to keep turning.
Well, I think if you don't have characters, nothing about the plot matters. I mean, the only reason we care about a plot is because it's happening to people that we love and care about. So characters always, to me, drive everything in a novel, especially in this kind of a novel, where, you know, there's a big whodunit element, but that is not really what you're reading the book for. You're reading the book to watch these people go through this disruption in their lives. And that's really what drives the book. If you try to drive a book by its plot alone, you're going to be cliched, and your plot isn't going to go someplace it needs to go. What you need to do is find people find your characters who are going to go to some place that you're not expecting them to go, and the only way they're going to do that is by being themselves and being discrete human beings that are fully drawn.
Now we're in total agreement.
I do.
I absolutely agree with that. As a matter of fact, actually, John and I were in conversation before my book first came out up at a bookstore in Davis, and thank you for that. That was great. So he's probably heard everything I'm going to say, but as I was going along the book, one of the major characters, I didn't even start with her in mind, but she kind of worked her way into it. She gradually became kind of a walk-on player. Then she kind of said, you know, I could say that. I'm the person that really ought to say that at that point. I mean, this sounds crazy, but this is really how it worked out, to the point where she became a major character in the book. And it's all because I wasn't thinking about character, the character was thinking about character, and finally I got smart enough to realize that that's where the emphasis should be, on the character.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about first person, third person, moving back and forth, that sort of thing.
Well, narrative voice is key to making all these making any book work. I don't recommend for first-time writers to use the first person. It seems like a natural thing to do, but there is a real tendency to confuse the narrator's voice with your own personal voice. And that is not something you want to do. You want to have your first-person narrator, if you use it, be a completely separate personality from you. He's got to be as much of a different character as a third-person narration character would be. Wouldn't you agree with that?
It would. Of course, I solved the problem by cheating on it, by having part of the book in a first-person narrative and part of it in a third-person narrative.
Yeah, I was going to call you on
But
that.
but the first-person narrative part was the narrative voice of a young woman, a woman in her early 40s. Don't think that you're going to confuse that with me, but I hope not anyway. I try to keep it distinct, but the rest of the book is written other sections are written in the third-person voice of other characters.
No, I wasn't saying you're going to confuse, your audience is going to confuse your first person with you, the author.
Right.
I'm saying you, the author, are going to confuse the I that you're writing about. See what I'm saying?
No, that's a problem.
Yeah,
it's
it's
something
definitely
to guard
something
against.
to watch when you're starting out, because it's a lot easier, I think, to go ahead and start writing in the third person. It'll tighten your writing up, number one. If you don't like it, you can always go back and put it in the first after you've written a couple of chapters.
Which is what I did.
Yeah. And I really think that, that's the key, is you just have to, you have to write in such a way that your voice, I often say this when I'm teaching classes. I say what you want to do as a narrator is you want to hold the hand of your reader and walk that person into your story. And you have to have a pleasant voice to do that. So if you're going to have a narrator, the narrator's got to be somebody you trust implicitly. Got to use the right words, got to have everything kind of in a friendly fashion. Even if you're telling about horrible stuff, you want to feel like you're being escorted into this story by a reliable, personable, probably educated person. What do you think?
Well, I agree. There was a term I heard the other day from an author talking about writing. It was it was close point of view versus distant point of view.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it before, but I realized that I tend to be of the close point of view character. I want to make sure that everything I write, it's clear whose point of view it is, and if it isn't if an event occurs and it isn't from the point of view of the character that I'm writing with, I have to change it a little bit to make sure that he or she would have seen it that way. But other writers do it differently. I see other writers who kind of expand the thing, not quite to an omniscient point of view, but expand it to the point where sometimes it's not quite exactly from the point of view of the main character, and they get away with it. I don't know if I could get away with it.
One thing you just mentioned, I think it's really important, is you use the term see, and it's key, I think, especially when you're first getting started writing. Think of it at, where's the camera? If you think there's always a point of view, and it might be, you might be seeing through somebody's eyes if you see a film, but more often than not, there's an angle on that scene and something's unfolding. Where you can get into trouble sometimes with third person if you're not close in enough is you drift too much, and the reader literally gets whipsawed around in the context of a chapter, and you lose any empathy or you lose any close-in point of view that you could get from that. So there's kind of a balance between those two.
Well, the other side of that coin is also the first person only can see things from that point of view. And that really can make a very short book. Just bringing that up as a possibility.
No,
Mr. Production here, if I wrote a first-person book, it'd be 110 pages long. So I have to do third person most of the time because that fills up my pages and I need to get my quote in every day.
What's interesting about that is a lot of the old classic hard-boiled novels were first person and they were really
And they
short.
were short.
They were really short.
I know.
Right? They were
Yeah.
120, 150,
Nickel
160
word, that
pages.
stuff, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why you have to do third person.
On the other hand, many of the classical novels we think back in, 17th, 18th century, 19th century are third person point of view, and they're not quite, they're omniscient. And you go back and forth from various viewpoints of various characters. I think that's to me, it's kind of a difficult style to read. But more importantly, I think from a mystery point of view, it's a dangerous style to write in because you're kind of, once you get out of character, you're running the risk that you're going to cheat your reader into not knowing who in the whodunit kind of a category. You're not going to know if it's never quite clear who the viewpoint is. It won't be, the exposition of the mystery won't work quite as well.
I'm going to open it up to questions in just a sec. Two more quick ones. You talked about taking the reader's hand and leading them into the story. Let's talk about openings, opening chapters, how important that is, how much you agonize over that, whether or not that's something you go back to again and again in the editing process.
Well, again, I don't think too much about it. I get a good sentence and I put it down and then I go, that's a good sentence. If it's a good sentence today, it's going to be a good sentence tomorrow. I don't worry about it, and then I just keep going. I don't know if that's really the norm, but I'm a big believer in le mot juste and the sentence that works. And once you get these people on the page, don't be afraid to put them on the page. Put your characters right there, even if you don't know who they are, because they'll tell you soon enough, as Bill has pointed out. They'll let you know.
Would be the question of
Really about the opening, because you
about the
hear a
opening.
lot of talk about it.
Here's where John's going to say I'm wrong. I probably
Only if he is, I promise. It's only if he's completely
Well,
wrong.
I found that when I was through with the book, and this is true of the book I'm writing right now, that the opening sequences will be edited much more than the rest of it, because first of all, my attention span is pretty bad, and if I start a book and I don't 10 pages in it, I don't like it, I probably won't finish it. So I think the opening has to be strong, and so I'm constantly tinkering with the opening of a book. By the time I'm through, I'm sure that my opening will be edited 20 times more than the ending will be. That's just me.
Well, I can't say he's all wrong, and it kind of breaks my heart. That's true. You have to go back, and fix it. What I'm saying, I guess I'm just talking about when do you go back and fix it.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You gotta just,
No. I agree with you on
slow
that.
down your
I agree
narrative
with you.
drive. That's the ballgame. And if you've got to go back and fix it later, fix it later. But, you're probably not going to get into the book very well if you hadn't written a pretty damn good beginning anyway.
This is true.
Yeah. It'll carry.
The beginning is key.
It's key.
You're sort of meeting in the middle on that one, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm not
it's
sure
kinda weird.
It's disconcerting. Specific to these two books, starting with John, what was you mentioned you weren't sure what was going to happen, you started writing, that's the way you write. What was the hardest thing about this particular book, either in terms of a sticking point or a goddamn I've painted myself into a corner? What was challenging about this one?
The real challenge was I decided to break it off into the San Francisco County Jail. And it's always tricky, and my books are all set in San Francisco, and it's always tricky to try to get something specifically right. And you're going to have a lot of people who are going to kill you if you're wrong. And if you're writing about the jail, you might even have some jail guards come and kill you anyway. So I wanted to be a little careful and to try to get my guys I had to move them completely from where I wanted. I always didn't want to. I don't like to lose my comfort zone. And so I was writing with my guys, and they were all doing well, and they were checking the characters and doing all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, Blitzky goes down to the jail. I'm going, don't do that. I don't want to go there. I don't want to talk about this. You know, jail stuff isn't sexy. You know, it just didn't work. And there, I did 200 pages of damn jail stuff.
I mean,
And it worked, I think. You know.
I got to say, your book's amazing. Here, John is not a lawyer, but his legal realism is unmatched in San Francisco crime novels. He writes with a sense of San Francisco's scene, which is people use his book as a guidebook. He lives in Davis. How do you know all this? let me tell you one thing. Elaine, your latest book, Elaine was reading before I did, and she stopped one night. She said, "Oh my God!" And she handed me this chapter and said, "Look, read that sentence." I thought, "Oh my God! Not only is that apartment right there at that place where he said it is, but we knew the woman who lived in there." Thank God you didn't make her the killer. So that would have been really embarrassing. But his sense of realism is just uncanny.
Well, thank you.
So, Bill, with you.
Yeah.
With this, right?
Yeah.
First novel, very ambitious. You're time shifting. You're moving around.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part of that, or what was the?
Oh my God!
the moment of terror?
Which year are we talking about when I was writing it? No, it took me a few years. The hardest part, I guess, was just what you said, getting the time shifts working to the point where the reader felt comfortable going from one period to another. It starts out contemporarily. I think 2008 is the prologue, and as you point out, it immediately jumps to 2082. And I've got to figure out all the stages to get you from here to there. And what I finally ended up doing is, focusing on a couple of characters that would link the whole thing together, and realizing that I would write the book focused on a couple of key years in the interim, and that would feed into the plot and feed into the overall social changes that I think that we're likely to see during that period of time. But it's difficult. I mean, you have to kind of imagine what the world's going to be like then, and what's going to change and what isn't going to change. What's the reader going to believe it will change, and how much will the reader believe my perception of what's likely to happen?
Well, what you did in that book that was really great is that you told those. I mean, you painted those scenes as though they were in the present tense. Actually, even though you're in the future, you wrote the scenes the way you would write a scene set today, and so everything in the scene kind of seamlessly went together and worked for with the time you were writing.
God knows I was trying to do that. I'm glad someone feels I did it.
You did.
No, it's the scenes hopefully each had a distinct, each year, each scene had a distinct feel to it, and tried to.
Yeah, but you didn't go hit people over the head with it was 2082. You just went into the scene and people were doing stuff
it was right
with
there.
that background, and it was better. I mean,
Stuff's blowing up, all kinds of things are happening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Should I keep going? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I'm not a writer, but I'm an avid reader, particularly of John's work. And I have two really interesting questions. One, I want to know how John keeps fresh. Because when I read serial crime novels or serial any novel, usually each subsequent novel is not as good as the previous one.
Yeah.
And it's such a terrible disappointment to see a fine writer deteriorate in front of me. And I know
Watch out, Bill.
Don't read my second one.
about this, about how much time do you spend for readers like me to recap on what I know is the history of your novel as they go forward. I know who the characters are, I know what happens in the past, and sometimes I'll come to another author fresh in the middle of a set of series, and I'm bored to death to find out, to have him recap for me all this crap that I should have read before, but I don't really need to know now. So those are two questions as a reader. I want to know how, because you are so prolific.
That's a
and
great
you're so good.
question.
How does that happen?
So recap the question real quickly so everybody can hear it. She wanted to know how John stays fresh, which I thought was a commentary on his personal hygiene, but apparently it has to do with his writing and writing a series character. And with a character like this, how do you keep that fresh for the readers and both not get bored as a writer, but also make it stimulating? You made the comment that sometimes series books feel like they get a bit more stale, and that's the opposite of what happens with John's books. And then you had that question too about what do you recap, which I think is for the writers here is a great question about what do you recap or what do you just assume?
Well, my characters age in real time, and I am kind of merciless in terms of having them change jobs, having them change the situations that they're in. I'm kind of merciless about sometimes killing lead characters. You know, you have to do things that, you know, they say it keeps you fresh, but really it scares the crap out of you when you're doing it. But you have to do that because everything is at the service of the story. And in terms of how I recap, I got a great bit of advice from my very first editor, a guy named Donald I. Fine. And he just told me to assume that nobody had ever read any of my books. And always, he said, no matter how many books you write, just assume you're starting from the beginning. And what I try to do is, I don't really care if you're aware of every single thing that's ever happened to my guys. I will sacrifice that for narrative drive and forward momentum. And I think the reason you feel like you're comfortable without those people under those changing circumstances is the fact that I don't really tell too much about what they've done in the past.
Exactly.
It's understood or it's referred to obliquely, but it's never a part of, you know, it never uses the word had, you know, basically, because once you start using the word had, you're telling, you're not showing, and you're dead in the water. You might as well just close the book and go to sleep.
Can I say one thing on that? I think one of the strengths of your series, one of many, is that you don't just have a series character, you have a whole series sub-society.
Yeah, I don't know what
all
happens.
kinds of people who come in and out. Some take subsidiary roles, some take major roles, but you always keep it fresh because there's always a new voice within the same series character.
It's all to avoid the boredom. You know, that's what you try to avoid. And if you have the same person, the same point of view telling the story. I just finished this new book that I just finished on Monday. It just turns out, and I had this was not in my outline that I handed in, nothing about it. It turns out it's about Dismas Hardy's daughter.
Wow.
Yeah,
In fact,
that's
I had
what
a
I
little
said when
gold
I heard it.
medallion on the front saying the first Rebecca Hardy mystery. You know, I
Is
didn't
that
know that
cool
when I
or
wrote
what?
it. It's
I'm
pretty
glad.
cool, but she's
I can't wait.
definitely in with Wyatt Hunt and all the other gang, and now she's an attorney, and, you know, she grows up in real time, and, you know, she kind of kicks ass a little bit and then gets her ass kicked.
I once heard a stat that was really interesting about series books, and it said the average reader discovers a series 3 or 4 books in. And if you look at John's writing, you look at guys like Lee Child, the key to those series with an ongoing character is you could start anywhere. You could start with book 7, you could start with book 20,
Right.
and it doesn't matter. And you might, wow, I love this is great, I want to go back to the beginning. Some people do that. Other people will just pick them up as they're fresh, and it actually shouldn't matter because it is part of a contained, interrelated universe that after you read them in whatever order, you'll be able to connect the dots.
Is that the way Agatha Christie did it? Yeah.
I don't think Perot changed too much.
No.
It was always
That
Perot.
was more.
That's interesting.
side,
That's a
yeah.
very interesting
Yeah.
point.
Another question. Yes, ma'am.
This is related, except I mean it within a single book. So I'm wondering how much, if at all, do you think about the intelligence of your reader, and how do you decide how often something needs to be repeated within a book? Are there any rules of thumb about, like, how many pages do you have to remind them that?
I make it a rule not to remind anybody of anything, because I don't like to explain anything. And so I figure if I didn't tell it right, then you're going to forget it no matter how many times I tell you. And if I do tell it right, that it sticks in your brain and it's there forever. And you don't want to be redundant, because that just is, again, boring.
I agree, and with my vast experience of one and a half books, no, I don't think that, maybe a corollary of that, what I try to do, because I hate it when I see it done badly in another book, I try to avoid the big data dump of information. I think the reader has to know, you need to know this, that, and the other thing, in order to understand how this event.
Remember, there's a gun in this drawer.
Yeah, and I try to, if a fact needs to get into it, I try to put it from the point of view of the character, give it some reason why the character is doing something. The last thing you want to do is just kind of repeat stuff. I totally agree.
Yes, sir.
Balance of dialogue. How much do you think is too much?
Dialogue is your best friend. Dialogue fills pages like nothing else. Dialogue is automatically showing and not telling. Dialogue without attribution, you can't write any faster than that. I mean, that's fantastic. So I think dialogue is your best friend, and most beginning writers don't realize that. I'm saying realize it. Start dating your dialogue. Whole pages of dialogue are good. A whole book of dialogue wouldn't be bad.
I was in a conversation with Don Winslow a couple years ago, and he specifically talked about the white space on the page. And if you see paragraphs that are too dense, which I'm not going to find in this book, that's a sign. You want the eye should just flip through the page, and the dialogue there's some great writers, Elmore Leonard, Gregory MacDonald, who would carry entire chapters of just pure unattributed dialogue, and it's hard to do, but it's where a lot of speed comes from.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to use probably less dialogue than you just described. I don't have a whole book of it, but when you have it, I find that when I get to a point in the story when I'm able to put in some dialogue, it goes a lot faster than the paragraph that leads up to that.
And keep in mind, when you write dialogue, you want to write good dialogue. A lot of times people go, well, this is the way people really talk. They walk in the room and go, hi, how you doing? Pretty good. How you doing? Pretty good. Okay, it's pretty hot today. Yep. Leave that out. You can start at the good stuff.
Yeah. Or you can summarize the bad stuff leading into the good stuff.
They said hello. They said their hellos.
Right.
Then
Jump into the middle.
jump. Boom. Yeah.
When you're writing a book that has sort of multiple tracks to it, where you're shifting from the viewpoint of one character to the other, and you're writing kind of stream of consciousness, do you day to day in the middle realize it's time to shift to be a different person, or do you write an entire story for one character and then realize, oh, somebody previously, I go back 2 days, and then have to write?
No. The question is, do I think about changing characters? How do I do that, basically? And I think I try to just make scenes interesting, and to do that, especially when you're doing multiple points of view, I just again pick a scene. I say, literally something like, I've been indoors here for a while. I think I'm going to have somebody in a car, or I've done too many restaurant scenes. I think I'm going to have somebody walking through the woods, or anything like that. And that kind of draws me to a character who might be there, not one of my lead characters, but some other guy or woman who's doing something different than my normal guy is doing it, and does it, on a different day, a different time of day, with different weather. I mean, all these kind of things are part of making the book feel rich and full with reality, rather than, hopscotching from one place to another, kind of randomly. You just kind of pick it out of the ether and go with the whole scene. I'm a big scene guy, as you can probably tell.
Yes, sir.
Initially, when you start your book, you have already decided who's going to be the major player in the book. And the second question, when you first started writing, did you introduce all these characters, or did it come along as your books evolved over the years?
Well, I wrote them all in order. And I didn't really...
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. The characters just kind of holistically showed up. I mean, I didn't have any idea that Dismas Hardy was going to be friends with Abe Blitzky, and then I realized he was a bartender, and he better know a cop, because, I didn't want him to be Jessica Fletcher. I wanted him to actually have a cop in the story. And so there was Blitzky, and then I wrote 2 books with Blitzky and Hardy, and then my publisher wasn't able to sell them at all. So I gave up on Hardy completely, and I thought Blitzky was more interesting, so I wrote 2 Blitzky stories. And then I had a bestseller with my Hardy book, so they asked me to write another Hardy story, but by that time Blitzky was my main love. And then I introduced David Freeman, and then anyway, it's all been, this is why it's this whole fugue state of what it's all about. And, I basically think you shouldn't take it too seriously. You just should have fun with it, but make your story serious, but don't make your your connection to your character is a deal breaker for you.
What's interesting about that though, and Bill, you mentioned this before as well, is that, those characters are there for a reason, because that's the story you wanted to tell, right? You were there, I better have a cop in the story, I better have and they just appeared out of necessity because that's what the plot was saying.
But something else you said, to answer the question over here, I think it's important to get your character moving. And when in doubt, get them out of the chair and doing something other than just sitting there thinking or talking. I find when I get the characters out on their feet, running out the door, chasing stuff, doing something, the rest of the story flows a lot more easily.
That is a huge point. That's a huge point. And let's keep in mind, there's a lot of things that sound like verbs that aren't very exciting. Like, when people look at somebody else, it's really not necessarily like a big moment. He looked. Oh, except Sheldon. Sheldon's so cute, you know what I mean? But really, I mean, I can't tell you. I was a teacher at this craft fest at the Thriller Convention 2 weeks ago in New York, and I had a bunch of papers to read. And man, if I saw the word "look" one more time, I was going to start killing people. It's like, really, that's not action. He glanced across the room. She looked back at him. Her eyes went to the corner. I went, her eyes went to the corner. Would he throw them up at the corner? Anyway, that's the kind of thing I really mean. Be careful about your verbs. Verbs are action words, and as Bill points out, action is where it's at.
Do you ever start a book where the outcome, you know what the outcome is, and so your whole time is, how do I get to that point? And the second question I have is, with your established characters, when, for whatever reason, as it's happened, it sort of dictates that you've got to kill off one of those characters. Is that at all gut-wrenching?
So two questions. Do you ever actually know what the hell's going to happen in your book? Right? Do you actually know how it's going to end? And then if you're killing off a character, how tough is that? How gut-wrenching or hard is that?
Well, I never know how it's going to end until maybe, most recently, the last book I did that I finished on Monday, I figured out the ending on Saturday.
Honestly,
I was sitting in my hammock and I said, I have to go to work right now. I got it. And I ran and I wrote 16 pages, and then I wrote 10 pages on Monday, and I finished. And that's when I knew how it was going to end. So in terms of now
I
killing
may never
somebody,
speak to you again. How can you wrote 16 pages and ended the book 3 days later?
yeah, well, it already had a lot of pages.
I know.
I was done.
And then you knew how it was going to end.
I knew how it was going to end then, because that was the best thing I've ever had.
Oh my God.
But in terms of killing people, you got to kill people if you're in the business,
Yeah.
crime business, because you don't have any credibility. If you know what I mean, you got to once in a while have somebody die, because otherwise you see Abe Blitzky get shot in the stomach and you go, oh, he's not going to die. This is Abe Blitzky. He can't. And so
Your gut-wrenching part of it is an interesting part of the question, though, because what John was saying earlier, you have to care. So I was, again, first year of the conference, somebody said to me, there are no tertiary characters. There's no secondary characters. You have to care about everybody has to be there for a reason, and there has to be something at stake. So I think it's always a little bit of gut-wrenching, but you're in the
it's also gut-wrenching to get emails from people who hate you afterwards, or people in character in settings like this where they'll raise their hand and they'll give it away. Why did you kill in this book? And I'm going, what?
Yeah.
Shush. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I have been rereading all of your books for the second time.
I love this woman. She's been rereading all of my books. So, for those of you who didn't hear it.
And I have all your books.
And for those of you who haven't gotten around to doing it.
And so I feel as though these people are my family. And, but it has struck me that it's very cinematic. It's almost, some of it's almost like a soap opera. And I wondered why,
In the best way, of course.
why don't we have this on television?
Anybody who wants to help get my books on television, you're welcome. come up to me and say hi later.
That's what you were leading up to. That's great.
I love it. I don't know. I just
John, I
don't
think
know.
John's asking you to start a petition.
The most cinematic thing I remember from his books, I don't know, about 3 or 4 books back, where he had the mayor of San Francisco walking out of our San Francisco bookstore by name. How about that? How cool was that to have a bookstore named?
Right, in the hot club.
Well, she remembers what you want to watch. Because you just reread it.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, maybe more for William, did you let anyone read your book while you were writing it?
Yeah, Elaine. And she's pretty, she can be pretty critical and come up with some good ideas. But then I had some other editors I brought in on the process. What I didn't do is to get into a writing group. And that's probably a mistake. I probably would have been able to write the book a lot faster if I'd done that. But honestly, I was just too chicken to do it. Just the idea of someone going over my unpolished manuscript was more than I could handle. I needed to do it myself. That's just me.
Yes, sir.
Did being in the publishing industry help or hurt you when you want to get published?
Did being in the publishing industry help or hurt?
Who, me?
Bill? Yes.
It didn't do much good. I mean, no, it's. I'll tell you how it helped. It helped because I've been through 20 of these conferences, and I wouldn't have been here if I hadn't been in the book business. I met a couple of good editors that I worked with in the business who helped me edit it. When the book was finally published, some other booksellers were more than happy to have events at the store. I was able to call on people like John. Cara Black was here, and others to, I can't remember, who helped me, Sheldon did something. People I could call on to help me promote the book. But did it make any difference to a major publisher as to whether or not they wanted to publish the book, whether I'd been around? No. It just didn't at all. They're publishers who can be pretty, pretty bottom line oriented. They either figure out where it's gonna work or where it isn't. Fortunately, I found a publisher who was a little more visionary than the others.
Yes.
Do you have an agent?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And I actually met my agent here at this conference, Lisa Gallagher. She's not here this year, but she was here for 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
I'm interested in, John, do you know policemen? Because I'm writing a book with a character who's a police detective, and I'm realizing I think I need to become friends with a cop.
Well, I am very fortunate. My best friend from the age of 14 is a guy named Al Giannini. He went to high school with me. He got out of school. We went to school, all through school together. I went and visited him when he was in the Peace Corps in Africa. He came back and became a homicide prosecutor in San Francisco for 30 years. So he's the first person who reads my books. When I'm done, because I don't know really anything about the law, and I've never been to law school, and I just give him my books and he just rips them to shreds. But we have a long enough history that I accept it from him.
Right.
He means well, he's often wrong, but he always thinks he's right, and that's good because I always think I'm right and we get along very well. People outside go, "Are you guys going to kill each other?" But that's what I do, and I've done it for all 25 books. So that's what I recommend is for any of you out there, go out and make a best friend at 14 and try to get him to become a lawyer in the business or a cop. But seriously, the other thing I've done, and it's very good, is I take through Al and through other friends I've made, I take people out to lunch at Sam's Grill, and I get in one of the little booths, and I try to get them as drunk as I can, as fast as I can. Because people who are drunk in the afternoon often like to talk about their work, and they'll tell you secrets that they wouldn't normally tell. And of course, I have the soul of discretion and never reveal the source. And it's a really fun way to spend an afternoon.
Good food, too.
And good food.
Yeah. And as someone writing a novel or in the thick of a novel, don't think that you have to be a best-selling author to make those acquaintances. You can reach out and you'd be amazed at how accessible police can be, judges, investigators. It's just if you say you're working on a novel and knocking on enough doors, people talk to you.
By the way, that's one of the reasons that right from the beginning, when we first started this conference, we decided to bring in some law enforcement people to kind of talk to the group and to add a little sense of realism to what we're talking about. that's been the height, really kind of the height of the conference for me, is to go in and listen to the cops and the judges and the DAs all yell at each other.
One quick point on that, if you're looking for resources like police and depending on the type of book you're writing, I mean, if you don't know anybody at all, there are, for example, Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime are kind of the two national organizations of crime writers. And I would encourage everybody here, if you're going to be a crime writer, to join those organizations, because if you don't know anybody, you put a note on their website or their listserv, and you'll get answers. Who knows a cop? I need to talk to somebody about this. And they put on events almost every month.
Well, just one other thing, never make a mistake about a gun.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, if you're going to write about a Glock, you better know every single kind of Glock they've ever made and what kind of bullet it takes, because if you get it wrong, you will be excoriated by the
About it
community.
forever.
Right.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering, this is for Ms. Petrocelli. I was wondering, how did you worry about technology in the book? Because technology is like
Oh, yeah.
a nemesis right now for a lot of writers.
Well, what I did, yeah, absolutely. When the book's set in the future, I had to think about that. And this is one of the advantages of being older. You can kind of look back and think, okay, if I had written about the year 2014 back 50 years ago, what would I have imagined this is like? And I looked around thinking, a lot of stuff has changed completely. I mean, the internet was something I never would have guessed. On the other hand, I think we're still flying around the same kind of jet planes we flew around in then. So I finally came to the conclusion that a lot of things change, a lot of things don't. And the question is how to weave a scene that would have the familiarity for the reader that you recognize where you are, but yet enough new stuff in there that it seems like it's in the future. But a lot of it's just plain guesswork as to what's going to change and what isn't.
I think we have time for one more question. Anybody?
She was talking about how your characters are like family, and you were talking about richness and reality. And sometimes I just wonder if there's a way to figure out how much is too much. I mean, they say the author should know everything about their character. And we do know about yours, like that he likes to cook, what kind of music he likes. But then other books, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to know what she ordered for dinner. I don't want to know this. How do you know that you're letting the reader in on important things that are not going to bore them?
You don't, really. You just go by your gut. Some days I feel like it's important to know what they have for dinner, and some days it's not. If I can tell a joke about something that they're having for dinner, I'll generally put it in. But if it's just a matter of like she had spaghetti carbonara and you don't get to see her being sexy while she's making it, that's different. So I try to make it integral to whatever the scene is, and sometimes it gets wrong, but I think most of the time it turns out okay.
Thank you both for doing this.